Help Lindani get home. This is the plea from the family of the South African man who was gunned down by police in Hawaii. 29-year-old Lindani Myeni was killed during a confrontation with police last week after they responded to reports of a burglary. His family has set up a GoFundMe page to bring his body back to South Africa. Family friend Mpho Mapolo spoke to Lindani hours before he was killed. He hosted Lindani and his wife at his home in Colorado in the U.S. last year. He joins us now live. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it, Mpho. So you, of course, spoke to Lindani just a couple of hours before this incident. Just tell us about that conversation and what was his frame of mind.
Hey, Shahan. Thank you for having me on the show. Yes, I did have a conversation with Lindani on the phone the day he was killed by the cops. And frankly, it was a very frank conversation. I mean, he was of level-headedness on that day. And the one key thing I remember is that he was anxious about his upcoming interview for his green card. It was supposed to be this week. So, you know, since I've gone through the same process, he kind of wanted to get my input and give him some pointers. So, I mean, it was a decent day. He was just out and about at the time when I spoke to him, and I didn't know shortly after that he had an encounter with the cops. So,
yeah. And obviously the story that we are seeing abroad is something totally different to what South Africans will say, because we saw the video of this incident, right? Police were responding to a burglary. They suspected him to be the man involved and then approached him but did not identify themselves. What are you hearing from the people you spoke to who were around and, of course, his wife, Lindsay?
Well, see, I mean, we're connected to Lindsay, and then we also know some people in Hawaii from South Africa. And, you know, the story is very sketchy. The reports started weird. I mean, at some point they made reference to somebody who was 40 years old who ended up in the hospital. And then also the confusion is we don't even know, we haven't heard the 911 call, what the call was about, why they haven't released that. And the video they sent us, I mean, anybody who has any sense, you look at that video, you kind of see an action or something that transpired in between. Is like, this is not the beginning of it. Something, when I get in the whole thing, the police don't want to release the whole footage, and this is where we've been trying to agitate through the South African consulate. We want them to, you know, talk to the U.S. State Department to ask them to release all that information, because I think in all of it, that's where we'll find the answers. Right now, we're just dependent on the cops telling us what they want to tell us, and with the history of, you know, what has been going on in this country with black people and cops, they tell us what they want us to think and make them look good. So we know Lindani, we know the kind of person he was. I know that day he was okay. He was, you know, there was nothing insane about his behavior. So all of a sudden he becomes a beast that beats up police, and then he's breaking into somebody's house at 8 p.m. Even if you were a housebreaker, you would go at 8 p.m., people eating dinner. None of this story makes sense. Yeah. And we want the truth.
So lastly, I just want to ask you, that anxiety, of course, given the way there are police officers across the U.S. handling situations when it comes to black people. We saw Lindani, you know, refuse to get on the ground initially, and then he was tased in that video. Do you think that was him trying to protect himself, given a situation that he's seen play out, you know, across the United States?
Well, as I stated, the video, we just saw like 40 seconds. And yeah, we saw him at the point when somebody kind of is creeping up behind him. And you heard the video. The police never said anything that they were the police until after the shots were fired. So in the dark, you're approached by people, somebody flashes a light in your eyes, blinds you. What's the first thing that comes to mind? I'm being attacked. And, you know, of course, we don't know what happened at that house at the same time. But this is where the cops should be, you know, releasing all the information so we can know and understand what happened.
And very quickly, I have to wrap. Do you think he's actually going to get proper justice in the United States for this incident? You know, we've seen so many cases where black people have been killed at the hands of police, and then there's no trial because the jury decides that there's, you know, no real intent to kill here?
You know, I mean, there's many cases like this, and of course, you guys know about the George Floyd case, and the triumph we had yesterday with the cop being convicted. So we're hoping that with enough noise and enough agitation, especially with the help of the South African government bothering the U.S. government about this, we need to get to the bottom of it and get the real information. That part of Honolulu is apparently notorious in terms of how they deal with people of color and brown and black-skinned people. So, where there's smoke, there's always a fire. And we need to go and make sure that we know who's causing us the smoke in Honolulu.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and speaking to us. Mpho Mapolo, a friend of Lindani Myeni, a South African man who was gunned down by police in Hawaii last week.